Versus Battles Wiki has released a new calculation and it's so garbage that you'll be baffled even after watching my previous videos. Now, the calculation is a new version of wall slicing mountains, and it's calculated at large island level. What they did was find the volume of the mountains by pixel scaling their sizes, and then find the time frame and the distance. This way they are setting up a kinetic energy calculation. Kinetic energy calculations rely on two factors. First is the mass of the object that is moving, and second is the speed of the object that is moving. In order to keep this video shorter, I'm only going to be focusing on the speed of the slice and the density of the mountains. I'm not even gonna go after the inconsistent paneling they used to calculate the size of the mountains and therefore their volume. Because while those are likely wrong, there is something that is much more atrocious about this calculation, which is the claim of the density of the mountains. Now, Versus Battles Wiki claims that those mountains are made out of ice. Then they claim that the density of ice depends on the temperature of said ice. For example, the density of ice at 0 degrees Celsius is a little over 9.1 grams per cubic centimeter, and the density of ice at minus 180 degrees Celsius is a little over 0.93 grams per cubic centimeter. Then they make up some imaginary formula on how much density increases when temperature drops. And this is where the calculation goes from bad to absolute trash. Because their next claim is to claim that Aokiji size is minus 28,000 degrees Celsius. The lowest possible temperature and absolute zero is quite literally minus 273.15 degrees Celsius. So they are quite literally using non-existent and impossible temperatures. Since I know that there are a lot of One Piece fans watching this, the reason that an absolute zero is the lowest possible temperature is because coldness, or low temperature, is literally the lack of movement in particles. The slower the particle move, the lower the temperature, and therefore, if they are absolutely still and then don't move at all, that's the lowest possible temperature, and that's what we call an absolute zero, or minus 273.15 degrees Celsius. Therefore, there is no such thing as something below that temperature, and there is no such thing as minus 28,000 degrees. But kid, this is fiction. This isn't real life. You can't apply a real life logic. Yes, I can, because Versus Battles Wiki is trying to apply a real life logic in order to highball One Piece. Because the whole reason that they claim that Aokiji size is 28,000 degrees is because it's apparently equal to Akaino's magma, and they claim that since Akaino's magma can burn Luffy, yet an Elf's lightning can't burn Luffy, then therefore his magma would be hotter than lightning. So they are quite literally using real life logic and real life physics in order to highball One Piece. Therefore, I can just as easily use real life physics and logic to debunk One Piece. You can't nitpick it just because it suits your argument better. Furthermore, both of their premises aren't even correct to begin with. Just because Aokiji size is equal to a kind of magma does not mean that it's negative 28,000 degrees. That's not how it works. That can literally just mean that Aokiji can slow down particles at a similar rate at which Akainu can accelerate them. This doesn't require Aokiji size to have the same numerical value in the negative spectrum of the temperature scale as Akainu's, magma in the positive one. That's not how it works. Furthermore, just because a kind of magma can burn Luffy does not require it to be hotter than an Elf's lightning. That's literally them showing that they have zero real life experience and zero knowledge on how lightning and magma actually work. Lightning quite literally disperses as it travels through your body and it leaves your body, whereas magma stays on your body and it stays on you until you melt. That's the difference. Unlike magma, lightning would literally just leave your body and disperse. This is why there are so many cases of people being hit and, struck down by those same 28,000 degrees Celsius lightnings and have survived and haven't been burnt. Meanwhile, there is not a single person that wouldn't be burnt if somebody were to spill boiling water, let alone lava on them. But key, zapping lasted for several seconds. Except there is no given time frame, so headcanoning how long Zoro was being zapped for won't help. It won't spawn a non-existent temperature. And now if we were to use an actual possible temperature for the ice, for example negative 180 degrees Celsius, the density of the ice would be just about 4 times less than what they actually got. This in turn reduces the mass of the mountains by 4 times. This alone would reduce the value of the feat from large island level to barely island level. Next up, there is the speed argument. This user does absolutely nothing to explain why the speed is as high as he claims, he just puts the speed value and calls it a day. I did however find the speed value in an old calculation of the same feat. The argument is that we see the split before Vargo's body could fall down, and using free fall calculations, they find out that this would happen within 0.18 seconds. The issue is that we see no indication of how much the mountains moved before his body fell down. Just because we see some random containers being split does not mean that the mountains were split the same amount before his body fell down. Mountains are much heavier, so therefore it would make much more sense if they were moved much less than some random containers. By the time the mountains were moved by the value they calculated, his body could have very well fallen down, considering the fact that we don't have a view of the mountains being split and his body in there at the same time. We also see that there was enough time for random liquids to start spilling, meaning that there was indeed a time frame between the two panels. Therefore, this entire value they got is a complete headcanon. Once again, it would make no sense to assume that the mountains were moved the same amount and at the same rate as the much lighter and much closer containers. Therefore, the entire speed value goes to the trash. Now, if you're generous to One Piece fans and say that the split took 0.36 seconds, for example, which is twice the time they calculated, power of the feet drops by 4 more times, making it large mountain level. So once again, yet another versus Battles wiki calculation for One Piece that's tier 6 or above gets debunked. This time they were desperate enough to even make up non-existent and imaginary temperatures in order to highball the feat. And the fact that this even got accepted on versus Battles wiki, which is the biggest power scaling community, really shows you just how bad the power scaling community actually is, especially the One Piece power scaling community. No matter how many fanboys want to come to my videos to call me a down player or to insult me or to do whatever to try to jump me, I don't care, I'll keep making these videos. Because somebody needs to step up and debunk all the wank that is going on in the debating community, because once again it's become very acceptable for people to try to do anything to wank their verses. Matter of fact, we've already done an amazing job so far. We've debunked multiple One Piece calculations, and not only have many YouTubers been inspired by my videos, but even Idea Shock, who is a die-hard One Piece power scaler, One Piece highballer, has now seen my video and has made his own video on Onigashima using many of my arguments and many of my showings. Keep in mind that the Onigashima scaling is something that nobody ever questions. It's something that every One Piece fan and power scaler, uses religiously. And it's something that even people that don't watch One Piece or power scale it turn to when they, check versus Battles Wiki. They don't know any better. They think that this is valid. They don't question it. And this is something extremely popular, and yet we've managed to change so many people's minds on, for example, Onigashima scaling, and a whole lot of other things as well. So the debating community really needs more people who would spread the truth, regardless of how many fanboys would be annoyed that their verses aren't as strong as they want them to be. If you've liked my video, consider subscribing to my channel for more content like this, and share it around so that we can spread accurate power scaling. See you in the next one.